Welcome to the UN Brief. Today we interviewed Dr. James Green. He is professor of Latin American Studies at Brown University. He is the author of many books about Brazil and Latin American political history, including the We Cannot Remain Silent opposition to the Brazilian military dictatorship in the United States. We also spoke about the Washington, Brazil office, an independent think tank that connects, supports, and carries advocacy to strengthen civil society, defend democracy and the rule of law, and protect human rights in Brazil. We also spoke about the transfer of power to Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva this past week and the significance of the moment in the history of the country. Thank you for watching and listening to the UN Brief, and don't forget to subscribe.
Actually written 11 books, but the two books that you're referring to are The History of Brazil, which is called Brazil, 5 Centuries of Change, originally written by a very prominent historian, Thomas Skidmore, and I've done the third updated edition. And then a collection of 120 documents called the Brazil Reader, which tells the history of the country from 1500 to the present. And then I've written other books about Brazil and about Latin America.
You wrote one that specifically speaks about the military dictatorship, how there was a movement after one of the people who were tortured by the military left and became exiled in the US, actually brought to the attention of academics and parliamentarians in the US that there was this egregious violations of human rights law happening in Brazil.
Right, exactly.
That's about this book.
So this book is called We Cannot Remain Silent. It was also published in Brazil with another title. And it tells the story of a network of academics, exiles, friends of Brazil, religious figures who organized a decentralized national campaign to denounce torture and repression during the dictatorship, which was in power from 1964 to 1985. And it tells the ways in which people in different ways raise public awareness about the violation of human rights in Brazil. It was very important for the international campaigns to isolate the dictatorship and to critique its violations of human rights.
Also, then you wrote another book, which was about the person itself.
The person that we're talking about was Marcos Arruda, who was a seminarian student, got involved in the student movement and then the opposition to the dictatorship, and was arrested in 1970. And his mother was at the time separated from the father and was working in the United States as an independent translator for the State Department. So she, living in the United States, communicated with her family in Brazil, stayed there to raise money to help for legal defenses, and collected all the letters and the correspondence and put them together in this memoir of her experience trying to get her son out of prison. And then that was the Brazilian edition of the book. And then we added an additional section of the book to hear the voice of Marcos himself, starting actually very dramatically when he was on what's called the parrot perch, an instrument of torture that he suffered, and telling his story, how he came to that moment and then what happened to him after that moment. And then I wrote a very long introduction explaining the role of the United States in supporting the military when it came to power in 1964.
And today, a day after the inauguration of President Lula da Silva, and you are in Brazil, what is the actual significance of this moment?
I think it's probably the most important transition of power in the history of the country. The last 4 years have been a nightmare for the Brazilians, in always conceivably imaginable, from destroying the economy to having a horrific position on COVID-19 and prevention of the spread of the pandemic, to really ignoring the poor of the country. And so Lula, who came to power originally in 2003, had a tremendous dedication to carrying out social programs that would improve the lives of ordinary people. And clearly, he is going to reinitiate that process in this year, 2023. And I think this was represented symbolically by two things. First, Bolsonaro fled the country on the 30th and went to Miami, refusing to do what is traditional, which is to pass the presidential sash from the former president to the new president. And so he was not able to be there. And so the inauguration team decided to do something very beautiful and very symbolic, which was to choose 7 people who represent the diversity of Brazil: an indigenous leader, a woman who is a scavenger of recycled garbage, a very poor person, a young Black boy, a man with physical deficiencies. And the 7 of them marched with the president to this ceremony where the sash would be passed on, and they, a group of ordinary Brazilians, I'm feeling emotional when I'm telling the story, passed on the presidential sash representing the people of Brazil. And I think this symbolizes for the country that Brazil will now again have a president who cares about the people, who wants to solve the inequalities, the social injustices. And his first measures, the first day, was to increase the minimum wage and to guarantee an ongoing program that provides a stipend for families below the poverty level. And so this is a very important measure that will expand the social justice and the possibilities of improving the conditions of the vast majority of Brazilians.
And he signed many decrees too in his first in his inauguration ceremony. During his inauguration ceremony, can you tell us a little bit about those?
Many different ones. One is to investigate the fact that former President Bolsonaro had declared a series of pieces of information from the government to be sealed for 100 years, including his agenda for when people were visiting the presidential palace, or his own records about whether he was vaccinated or not, because he declined to inform people about vaccination against COVID-19 and discourage people from really doing that, promoting a series of the falsehoods. And so that this decree will reveal a lot of the behind the scenes maneuvers that the Bolsonaro administration did over the last 4 years and reveal them to the public, to reinforce a very important freedom of information law that was passed years ago, which Bolsonaro was denying. He's also decreed, I mentioned, the increase in the minimum wage and also this program, the federal government program. He's declared that they're going to stop the exploration of mining in indigenous territories. He is going to be investigating the reversal of a series of environmental procedures in order to start the process of ending the deforestation of the Amazon region by loggers and illegal miners. So he really is setting a signal to the country that he's going to start reversing all of the policies that the Bolsonaro administration had been implementing for 4 years. Another very important thing was to eliminate a very, very liberal law that allowed basically anyone to get access to arms, and to cut that, because there's been a huge increase in the number of weapons that people have been able to get. Many of them get them through this provision, which allows them as collectors to get them, and then they sell them on to criminal agents and to the militias and the mafias of Brazil. So this will be very important to kind of decrease the numbers of weapons that are circulating in the country.
Tell us a little bit about the organization that you are leading now. Washington, Brazil, is it called?
The Washington, Brazil office. It was actually, the idea of the Washington, Brazil office came about on the 1st of December in 2018, when 200 Brazilians and academics of Brazil gathered at Columbia Law School to found an organization called the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil, which over 4 years mobilized tens of thousands of people against the Bolsonaro government. I was the national co-coordinator of that organization, and we presented a resolution in this meeting to found an office in Washington, D.C. that could articulate the interests of Brazil in the U.S. Congress. And one of the most important campaigns that we carried out in 2022 was to ensure that the Biden administration refused to do anything to support a potential military coup d'etat should Bolsonaro lose the elections. And so the Biden administration, in fact, in many different occasions, sent a clear message that they believed in democracy in Brazil, they believed in the electoral process, and they would not tolerate a military takeover should Bolsonaro lose. And this was also reinforced in Congress, where 64 congressional representatives and senators signed a similar declaration. And then Senator Bernie Sanders, the week before the first round of the elections, presented a resolution in the Senate, which was unanimously approved, calling on the end to all U.S. economic and military aid to Brazil if the military interfered in the elections. And in fact, this, I think, was very important in blocking the military from trying to take power, even though Bolsonaro supporters during the last month called on the military to intervene and overturn the elections.
Thank you so much. Really a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation and following up what the Washington, Brazil office will be doing in the coming years.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and it'd be a pleasure to join you at any time.
Professor James Green from Brown University, National Co-Coordinator of Democracy Brazil and President of the Board of Directors of the Washington, Brazil office. Thank you for watching and listening to the UN Brief, and don't forget to subscribe,